Hello, everyone, and welcome to Virtual Compliance Management Regulatory Briefing when the regulators have a finding what to do. My name is Cheryl Kelly, and I work in the marketing department here at VCM, and I will be your moderator today. We know your time is valuable, so each third Thursday of the month at 10 a.m. Pacific, we provide these brief sessions to cover key regulatory issues in just 15 to 20 minutes. Before we start, I have a few items to cover. During the session, all participants' lines will be muted. We encourage you to interact with our speaker, James DeFrance, by typing in questions in the chat window by clicking the second green bubble at the top of your screen. James will address all the questions at the end of the briefing. A recording of today's briefing will be sent via email to each registered participant, and we welcome you to share the material with other officers at your bank and with your social networks. We'd love to have you connect with us and keep the conversation going beyond today's event, so please email us questions in case something comes up that you didn't think of during the session. And now, let me introduce today's speaker, James DeFrance. James DeFrance is a consumer and real estate lending compliance specialist and a certified regulatory compliance management and anti-money laundering specialist with more than 30 years of experience in the banking industry. He has served as a senior compliance examiner at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco and has spent time as an analytical manager at the Office of Thrift Supervision, as well as a commissioned National Bank Examiner at the OCC. I am pleased to give the floor to James DeFrance.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you everyone for attending. Good morning, good afternoon. Just a quick reminder, as Cheryl said, we do these every third Thursday of the month. Our next briefing is entitled, Are BSA Software Independent Reviews Necessary? That's quite a title, but what we're talking about there are the need for model validations. Now, before I go any further, I'd like to wish you all a happy St. Patrick's Day and a pinch to all of those that did not wear green today. Today our briefing is about when the regulators have a finding what to do. As Cheryl pointed out, I'm a former regulator. I always like to say I'm a reformed regulator, but I bring both of the perspectives to you on this one, as a regulator and as someone who's been on the other side as a compliance officer. So you've been in that situation before where the regulators have come into your room and they want to tell you that they have a finding. Now, the first thing I want to tell you, as a former regulator, there's no such thing as a hit list. We did have conversations about certain personalities at banks, but there's really no such thing as a hit list or anything like that. So when they're coming to tell you there's a finding, just remember, there's not personal animus or anything like that. You don't have to run or scream or yell or be angry. They're really just trying to do a job. There were times, I have to admit, when things did get personal, but that really is the exception rather than the rule. Just remember that the whole compliance examination is really a test of the compliance management program, or some people call it the compliance management system. So really what they're looking at is your overall system for compliance at your institution. Okay, just remember this. There are findings, and there are all kinds of different findings. Not all findings are the same. So among the things examiners are trained to look for is to consider whether or not the finding is systemic or somebody just had a bad day. Remember, some findings have enforcement consequences such as civil money penalties, and others even have this thing called a look back. For those of you who haven't experienced that, there are times when examiners find something that is so bad that they consider it systemic, and they want you to look back for 2 years on certain transactions to see if they're similar sort of violations. A quick example of that, for example, say there was flood insurance and you hadn't been requiring flood insurance for properties that were taken as an abundance of caution. In that case, the examiners might find that the violation is systemic, and they might require to look back for 2 years at every piece of property that's been taken as an abundance of caution. So again, one of the things they're looking at is the finding systemic or is the finding just isolated. Okay, so the first thing to do is to find out exactly what the finding is. And here it's important to remember that there are times when there are certain areas where there might be miscommunication. So, for example, the examiner may have asked, where would I find flood insurance information? And the answer that was given is, you'd find them in the loan files. But in fact, that process had changed and the flood insurance information is actually centrally located. So maybe the violation is the result of miscommunication. But it's important to find out, is this a regulatory violation? Is it the result of regulatory guidance? And here's one that's really important. There are times when interpretation of an old rule might be the reason. So, for example, for many, many years, the notice requirement on flood insurance wasn't necessarily looked at or heavily enforced by the regulators. So every time a loan is modified, increased, extended, and so forth, a new notification has to go out to your customer, even if they already have insurance. And there are times when the regulators emphasize this. So it's a different interpretation of an old rule. And so there's those times when the examiners have looked at your loan portfolio and had no problems. They emphasize a new rule, and now there's a finding. I think it's really, really important as you get into this that do not use that, I wasn't cited for this the last time. I can tell you as a former examiner, it's one of those things that it's just not a good argument. It's often like the argument, you drive 75 miles on the freeway even though the speed limit is 65. Well, when you finally do get caught, it doesn't mean that, well, you didn't catch me yesterday, you didn't pull me over yesterday. The speed limit is 65. And just because you weren't cited on one day doesn't mean that the speed limit has changed. So don't use that argument. It isn't helpful, and it tends to antagonize the examiner. Really, really, really important to find out why this happened. I think a lot of times institutions just take the finding, correct it, and move on. But it's really, really important to get to the root cause of the problem. Here's the thing, is that you need to find out, is it a training issue? Was there a systemic issue? Can the problem be isolated to a particular individual? Maybe only one person needs to get training, or perhaps a business line misunderstood the requirement of the regulation. But make sure you understand why the violation happened and document that, because this goes to the overall strength of your compliance management program. The examiners are going to expect that you'll document the root cause of the problem when you respond. It's also important to figure out whether or not this is indicative of a bigger problem. Once you've determined the root, it's really important to find out what the implications are for your compliance management system. Is it because we're just not looking deep enough? Maybe our training isn't covering everything it should. Are we getting all the information that we need to make sure we're keeping up with changes in regulations? Really important question to ask is, are the scopes of your audits doing everything that they need to do? There's times when the scope of the audit just simply doesn't cover all the information it needs to cover. And so it's important to also match those scopes of the audits with with your compliance risk assessments. You know, when you have a finding, it doesn't necessarily mean somebody's incompetent or anything like that. It just means that there's holes in the system that need to be addressed. Next step is to communicate. And here what we're talking about is, of course, senior management has to know the nature of the finding and the root cause and what it is you're going to do about it. It's also important to make sure that you communicate, especially that root cause and your plan of attack to fix it, to the regulators. Here's the thing, is that there's no need to worry about it. I mean, violations happen, findings happen, they are what they are, but the regulators need to know that the whole thing is being taken very seriously. And once they do that, once they feel that you're taking it seriously, that you've looked at the root cause, that you have a serious plan of attack to fix it, trust is developed, and trust becomes a real key component to what they'll do in terms of enforcement action. Again, as a former regulator, I can tell you that if I thought that the management of the bank was taking the action seriously, then I would believe that they really are going to fix whatever it is, and it's less likely that we would take more severe enforcement action. But it's really, really important to find out exactly what the regulatory implications of the finding will be. So it's important to find out, are you asking for reimbursements? Will there be civil money penalties? Again, this idea of a look back, if you've never experienced that, a look back is an extremely time-consuming and expensive endeavor. So if they're really talking about a look back, it's important to pay close attention because, like I said, this could be a real severe sort of situation. It's also important to communicate the full extent of what it is the examiners are looking for and what their expectations are. Let me give you a quick example. We were at a bank where there was a failure to file a SAR that was cited. Well, the thing of it was that the bank just agreed to go ahead and file the SAR, but what they didn't determine was how serious this was, and it turns out the bank was being then asked to sign a consent order for failure to file a SAR. So it's really, really important that you understand the extent of what the examiners are saying the violation is and what their regulatory expectations are. There are times when we don't agree with the examiner, and that's okay. I think a lot of institutions try to just go along because they don't want to anger or upset their examiners. But here's the thing. If you truly and legitimately disagree, it's really not advisable to just go along to get along. What's important is to get your ducks in a row, to get all of your information together and start putting your disagreement in writing. This is why it's really important to find the source of the finding and do your research. Now, one of the things that happens is that people tend to disagree with the law. They don't like HMDA or they don't like Reg B. That's really not a good argument. It's really not the forum to argue about that. What's important is to argue about the specific violation at your institution and make sure that you have all the information together and then present the case why it is you disagree with the interpretation. Perhaps you have more information, different facts, that sort of thing. Arguing about the law itself, again, it's just going to just cause irritation and not really get you where you need to be. Remember, once again, the "I haven't been cited for this before" argument really doesn't carry the day. It's probably true, but it's also not relevant to the particular examination that you're having or the particular finding. So 5 things to take away from this. Remember to get full information about the source of the finding. Remember to determine the root cause of the finding. Make sure that you understand whether or not this is a sign of bigger trouble. Communicate your findings to both senior management and to the regulators in terms of what you're going to do for remediation. And remember this, examiners are people too, so make sure you understand exactly what it is that they're citing and make sure that you can trust and verify. With that, we always like to put a little ad in at the end of these things. I just want to bring up our subscription service we're very proud of. It's called VCM Connect. It's an online database, and it allows access to a bunch of our compliance experts. I encourage you to contact us at vcm4u.com for more information about VCM Connect. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Cheryl for questions.
Okay, and our first question is, does a finding mean that our auditors aren't doing a good job?
Not necessarily. Sometimes the examiners can take a different look, or as I mentioned before, have a different interpretation of the regulation. So one of the things you just have to deal with is that different examination crews have different areas of expertise, and so you can just get a different look at the same regulation. It doesn't necessarily mean that the auditors haven't covered the particular area, but it is worth a look to sit down with the auditors after the examiners have left and just ask, hey, what did you cover? Why is this different?
Okay, and our next question is, are there things that you can do to stop a look back?
It's very, once the examiners have asked for a look back, it's very, very difficult to stop it. The only thing there I can suggest is, again, getting your information together, showing them why. For example, the example I gave with the abundance of caution in the flood loan, if you can show that it was one particular officer who just had a bad day or wasn't paying attention, and you can show that on a regular basis you do the flood insurance, then you might be able to stop it. But it's really just a matter of documentation.
Okay, and what if we ask for a copy of the regulation or guidance being cited and the regulators refuse?
That's a really good question. If they refuse, then I'm just going to tell you again, as a former regulator, you're on to something. If they refuse to give it to you, it means that they might just be going on an interpretation or that sort of thing. So I think you're really on to something there when they refuse to give it to you. Remember that there's a system in place. All the regulatory agencies have a system in place for you to escalate if you need to. They have either an ombudsman or a field office or somebody you can talk to. And it is, if they refuse to give it to you, I just strongly advise pushing on that and making sure that you get a copy of whatever it is you're being cited for.
Okay, and is there a way to report bad behavior by examiners?
Yes. Both the FDIC and the OCC now actually have surveys that they send out at the end of the examination. And by and large, those don't get filled out. I strongly advise go ahead and take them a few minutes to go ahead and fill them out. They are anonymous. You're not going to get in trouble for filling that information out. If somebody really is just not professional or just not behaving in a way that's appropriate, management at the regulatory agencies needs to know that. And the only way they can find out is getting that sort of feedback. Cheryl, I did see a question that someone asked about the ego of the examiners. And you're right, there's times where they just don't want to hear your explanation. But that's where you have the field office and the administration of the regulatory agency to fall back on. Again, I can't overemphasize that they need the feedback, and I think a lot of institutions don't want to give it because they're afraid there'll be some sort of retribution. But I assure you that's not the case. The only way they know that people are misbehaving is when people let them know that through feedback.
Okay, and our last question is, can you give an example of when going along to get along ended up badly?
Sure. In the example, just a little bit more detail about an example I gave, there was a bank we were working with that did not agree that they should have filed a SAR, but they didn't want to tick off the examiners, so they went ahead and filed a SAR at the direction of the examiners. Well, when they did that, the examiners turned around and said, well, you have systemic failure because you didn't file a SAR, and as a result, we're going to seek civil money penalties against you and a consent order because you have a failure of the system. So there, going along to get along really, really hurt the bank, and it was hard for them to argue otherwise because they did file the SAR at the direction of the examiners and not on their own. So you have to be really careful about that.
Okay, well, on behalf of James DeFrance and the staff at VCM, thank you for listening and participating. Please join us for the next VCM regulatory briefing, our BSA software independent reviews necessary, on Thursday, April 21st at 10 a.m. Pacific. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.